Well, good evening, everyone. A huge, warm, very warm welcome to tonight's session of our Let's Talk About It webinar series, brought to you by Methodist Women in Britain. Whether you're joining us live on Zoom, in the room, or you're going to be watching this later, we are so glad you have pulled up a chair to be with us. Tonight is extra special because we're broadcasting to you live from the Telford International Centre, the venue for the 2026 Conference of the Methodist Church in Britain. While the halls are buzzing with early preparations and the representative session doesn't officially open until this Saturday, it feels incredibly fitting to bring the spirit of this gathering into our conversation tonight. If you're new to the series, Let's Talk About It is all about pulling back the curtain on topics that deeply affect our lives, our families, our communities, but don't always get the airtime or the honest conversation. But tonight, we're going to give them that conversation they deserve within a church setting. We're here to tackle these big subjects together with wit, with wisdom, a whole lot of heart and sensitivity, and always grounded in a supportive community. Tonight is an incredibly vital session. Our theme tonight, gender and sexual identity, celebrating every beautiful part of God's creation. We are leaning into the beautiful truth from Psalm 139 that every single one of us is fearfully and wonderfully made. We want tonight to feel real, open, and graceful conversation. To help us to navigate these areas, we're joined by two fantastic ordained leaders who bring a wealth of wisdom, theology, and lived experience to our panel. Our first panelist is Reverend Dr. Karl Ruthlidge. Hello, Karl.
Hiya.
Karl is a Methodist presbyter, currently ministering in the London district at Kingston and New Malden Methodist churches. He is a trans man who has written and spoken extensively on gender and trans experiences. You're welcome, Karl.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. I also have here Reverend Leonora Wassell, or for many of you, you might know her as Lee. She's my compatriot, the other co-chair for Methodist Women in Britain. She's a familiar face to all of us, has written a book and is in the middle of writing another book, but she's going to unpack the concept of sexuality and share some of her own journey. Welcome.
Thanks very much.
Just a quick note before we start, before I hand over to Lee. We want this space tonight to be a space of profound grace and learning. We welcome your honest questions. However, please remember that our panelists are sharing their lived realities with us. We ask that all questions remain respectful, focused on the broader themes of the faith and identity, and respectful of personal privacy. We will not be exploring invasive personal medical questions or past naming histories tonight. Let's keep our focus on celebrating who God has created us to be today. So without further ado, let's dive in. Karl, I'm going to hand over to you first to help us define and unpack the concept of gender. And I believe you have a great model to share with us tonight.
So hello again, everybody. It's fantastic to be with you. Matt, I don't know if we can have the genderbread person on the screen. So thinking about the concept of gender is quite a challenge because it's become, as I'm sure you're all too aware, very highly contested in recent years, mostly because of the backlash around trans rights, which has often been framed as supporting women's rights, which is an interesting way of looking at it. And I might say a little bit more about how that has impacted me later on. But for the moment, to stick to the task that I was given to think a bit about the concept of gender. So I'm just going to pop that image on the screen. This is a model that's been around for a few years and I think is really very helpful, called the gender-bred person. And it lays out some of the complexities around the concept of gender, which, while others might disagree, I would argue is distinct from the concept of biological sex, in that biology is part of it, but not the whole of it. So starting off with what we might think of as the easiest to get our heads around, biological sex. In some of the debates about trans rights, it's often said, well, if you were born with one set of genitals, you're this, another you're that, end of story. But actually, human biology is a lot more complicated than that. When people talk about biological sex, it's always interesting to ask, well, what do you actually mean? Because there are different elements to that. So one could go, as doctors tend to do, on the genitals a baby is born with. But you could look at genetics, you could look at the chromosomal makeup that somebody has. You could look at what are called phenotypes, which are sort of secondary sex characteristics, the way one appears. So things like the deepness or otherwise of your voice, whether you have facial hair, fat distribution, skin density in the face, things like that that differentiate. And while most people are able to kind of be put into one of two boxes in inverted commas as a man or a woman, actually around 2% of the population, roughly the same proportion who are ginger, are what's called intersex, which means that for various reasons, they're not kind of neatly male or female. Sometimes that makes itself apparent at birth, and one of the really desperately sad and I would say reprehensible things that has tended to happen in recent decades is that doctors will make a judgment about whether it's easier to turn that child into a boy or a girl and give them surgery as a baby when they can't possibly consent, in order to decide what they are, rather than letting someone's identity emerge. So it can be obvious at birth that somebody is intersex, but it might not emerge till puberty. It might not emerge till somebody tries to have children. It might not emerge until they have an MRI scan for something else, and then different structures are noticed. So human bodies, even on that level of biological sex, are quite complicated. And I say a lot more interesting than a narrow binary would suggest. Now, our biological sex links into how we are perceived by others, and relates to also how we present ourselves, which brings me to gender expression. Now, one can present oneself in a variety of ways. Before I transitioned, I suppose I was always a bit tomboyish, but I wasn't especially sort of masculine in my appearance. But I have friends who are female and present in quite a stereotypically masculine way. I have gay friends who present in a very stereotypically masculine way, and all sorts of different variations, more feminine ways of appearing. And again, there's no right or wrong way to express gender, I would say. But there are dynamics in society around how gender is perceived. And I think the time I've had most difficulty in being a trans person was very much when I didn't obviously fit into one box or the other, when I've been taking hormones for up to about the first year. Because people couldn't put me in a box, either they clicked that I was trans and had a go at me for that, or I was called a really ugly woman or really butch woman, and comments like that that were reflective of the way gender is policed. And I would say it's probably harder to be a feminine man than it is to be a more masculine woman. But there can be, as you're probably all too aware, all sorts of prejudices all round, sadly. People who don't fit in one box or the other. And while I'm on the topic of gender expression, I think one of the things that's really tragic about the Equalities and Human Rights Commission guidance around how to treat trans people is that the people who are most likely to get a hard time for not neatly fitting into stereotypes of this is what a man, this is what a woman should look like, are most probably going to be women who are cisgendered and who just don't happen to be feminine enough, inverted commas, for some people, probably some men. So gender expression is part of gender in this framework, along with biology, but also gender identity, which is harder to pin down. But I think it's kind of your sense of who you are, and whether you see yourself as male or female, as both or neither, as sometimes one or sometimes the other. There's numerous what are called non-binary gender identities, people who don't see themselves as male or female. So my wife's sibling is non-binary and sometimes dresses in a more feminine way, sometimes dresses in a more masculine way. It depends on how they wake up on any given day, and it can vary for them over time. I very much identify as male, but have had quite a struggle for that to be accepted. Different people know they're trans at different ages, and I was 4 when I first knew, which was the first time I'd really been around other kids. I got myself thrown out of nursery school, which is another story for another day. And so starting primary was really the first time I'd been around lots of other children. And I couldn't understand why everybody was telling me I should behave in a way that felt really contrary to who I was, because I knew I was male. And I couldn't get my head around why everybody was wanting to put me in the female box, because I'd been allowed to dress how I like and do what I like at home. There'd never been any issue with my parents at that age anyway, trying to force stereotypes onto me. So I think gender identity research has shown forms at about the age of 3. It's something that I would say is innate. There's research that's been done with brain scans that shows that trans people's brain makeup most closely reflects the gender that they identify with. I think some of that research might be a little spurious, but it gives you a sort of sense of this is part of who a person is. This is not mere feelings. This is not a mental illness. This is not something that's been made up by people. It's something very, very deep. And people might realise they're trans like I did at a very young age. Very often it's in puberty. Some people don't come out well into their adult years. I've been looking out for someone recently who's in their 60s who now wants to transition. So we all have a gender identity. For most people, there's no conflict with our biological sex and the part of the gender expression spectrum we want to sit on. But for some of us, that has jarred very deeply for a long, long time. So that's a kind of whistle-stop tour of the gender-bred person, but it is to say that all of these different aspects contribute to the concept of gender. And there's some little heart things down here about sexuality and romantic attraction, but I won't tread on Lee's toes, so I'll leave her to talk about that. So, I mean, I guess for me, one of the things I would want to say, given the way that trans rights and women's rights, as I said earlier, are often pitted against each other, is firstly, I don't think that's true. I think transphobia and homophobia and misogyny all stem from the same root, which is this idea that there are these 2 boxes and there's a real man and a real woman, and if you don't fit in that framework, then you're fair game. And women experience that all too often through everyday misogyny and sexism. I've experienced it more through transphobia in recent years, but I could tell you stories of the things that used to be shouted at me in the streets when I presented as female, really bad experiences of the way men too often behave. So it is something I've seen from both sides in inverted commas. But I do want to say I think all those prejudices do stem from the same root. And so actually feminists and trans people, rather than being enemies, should actually be natural allies. And if you're interested, there's a group called Not In My Name, which is for cisgender women, which is basically women who are not trans. It's like the equivalent of heterosexual when we're talking about people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and so on. I think I also want to say in the midst of that, as I said, that women are likely to be harmed by attempts to squash trans rights in in an attempt to impose a kind of biological essentialism. You know, this idea that your sex, as the doctor decides it when you pop out, defines you for the rest of your life. So human beings are far more interesting and complicated than that would allow for. So I think I've probably whittled on for about 10 minutes now, and I think that's probably enough. So I'm happy to answer any questions about, I don't know, what I've said about gender, about how things are affecting trans people, about the EHRC code and the whole shambles of that. Yeah, so I'll hand over to Lee now, but when we come to questions, feel free to chip in.
Thank you very much, Karl. Thank you for that. And I think you'll all agree that the concept of the gender-bred model gives us a lot to reflect on. I will now hand over to Lee, who will be building on that understanding of how God creates us. Over to you, Lee.
Right. Well, we're here at Telford in 2026. An important date was this time of year in 1993. Don't know if you went to the Derby conference. This is when the Methodist Church looked at sexuality. I had come out in 1992 in my theological training, so used this piece of work as part of my theological looking at sexuality and spirituality. The Derby Declaration was looking at affirming LGBT people in all that they do, that they're welcome in churches, in ministry and mission, but they could not express that in a physical way. I was ordained an Anglican, and when I was at Deanery Synod, the bishop was saying that sexuality is an expression of our very humanity. But if you're gay, you can't express it. So I said, well, surely that then undermines your humanity. And I was told, no, Leonora, you misunderstood me. I don't think I did. But sexuality is more than sex. We always think this. We had intimacy recently on our webinars, and that's what comes to mind. Intimacy is far more than that physical expression. So is sexuality. But sexuality is more than homosexuality. That's the first thing many people will think about. So what is sexuality? It's a very sensitive topic, and people may avoid discussing it openly. However, open and respectful conversations can help reduce that misunderstanding. And I hope that you will ask questions at the end, which you may have always wanted to ask, but you don't want to upset someone. And so please have those questions in mind, because it is in conversations together. In my theological piece on sexuality and spirituality, I put that a mother had spoken to me, and she said, lesbian now means to me my daughter. It has my daughter's face on it, because it had been an intellectual debate. And when we come away from the intellectual and we personalize it, humanize it, it's more difficult to be hateful. And so my aim is not to tell anyone what you should believe. There are some still believe that it is wrong. But rather than to encourage a greater understanding of all sexuality as a natural part of human experience. So sexuality encompasses a person's feelings, our attractions, desires and relationships, our very identity, as I said, and our values. Yes, it includes biological factors, such as our bodies and hormones, but it's also shaped by psychological, social and cultural influences. In other words, sexuality is not simply about sexual behaviour, and that's what everyone sticks on. And if you say about sexuality, homosexuality, you get, ugh, I couldn't imagine, and I'm going, I'm not expecting you to, is not to look at just the physical, about what does it mean to be a human being. Because in sexuality, that's how we relate to each other. It's our emotions that we share. It refers to how individuals understand and describe their own sexual orientation. I had no idea growing up what it was. I couldn't understand why I liked girls. I had no name for it. My great uncle was gay, but I didn't know that. But all we had was a lot of laughter, a lot of titters, a lot of jokes. And this was in the 60s when it was illegal. So I had no concept of what it was, I just knew. But culture has told us that it's wrong. And church culture, indeed, has seen it for many years as against God's plan for us. The word homosexuality only came into the Bible last century. And when we look at the clobber passages, they really aren't what they're meant to be. Sexuality is more than homosexuality. It's important also to recognise that each of our individual journeys are that. They're unique and individual. We can only support when we have, we can only benefit when we have a supportive environment, when we're able to be asked questions and be supported. For 30 years, I had to hide who I was as a Methodist minister. As I said, I was ordained Anglican. I did tell the bishop the night before I was ordained, because I thought you can't do anything about it now. But I was ordained in my own heart as the authentic me. But I was told to hide it. Then I became a Methodist, and I was told by my chair of district, don't tell anyone. So the impact on me was not so much on my mental health, but it is on for many, was on my physical well-being, because I have a muscle complaint. So having to hide who I was and not be authentic impacted me, and it impacts all of those who struggled in the years before we were accepted within the church. My journey of sexual coming out is the same as the Methodist journey from 1993. So in 2001, I was moved from my circuit because I was in a lesbian relationship. The chair of district asked me if I was, and I said yes. And he said, where would you like to move to? I can move you anywhere in the country. So it's still not accepted for a minister to be gay, and you could be gay, but not in a relationship. And that went for a lot of people within the congregations, because there's a lot of people affected, not just the people who are homosexual, but their parents, their children, their sisters, their brothers, their cousins. So many are affected by it. But the church moved on in those years, and that conversation went, and there was a growing mutual respect, trust, and communications. So that coming together of acceptance and being accepted for who you are. And again, as Karl said, it's on a continuum that there's bisexual, those who are attracted to both genders. There are those attracted to their own gender. There are those who are not attracted to anyone, asexual. And of course, there are those heterosexual who are attracted to their own gender. Sexuality and being able to be who we are is best for our health. It's our well-being. We need to be. And when I had to retire on health grounds because of how it had affected me, when I heard God visibly or audibly say to me, I made you, just be you, I was healed and went back into ministry, and then started preaching about our identity, our sexual identity, going across the spectrum, that we are created in God's image, and that image is pure love. Because for me, God is non-binary in the sense that God is neither and both and all. And so it's the duality. And as Karl was saying, this binary idea and that God, that's just too small a box for the wonderful and brilliant God that we follow. So when I did that, I started going around and I noticed people in the congregations standing up, standing taller. They were able to think, yes, my daughter, my grandson, who was my granddaughter, I, as well, am loved by God. And so I put the rainbow on my dog collar as an identity to tell others, not about me, but about the great God who loves each one of us. And so it's been a great privilege for me to share, going round the connection, sharing all my story as well as this issue of God loving all. Sexuality is a natural and complex aspect of human life. It's our very essence of who we are. It involves much more than physical attraction and includes identity, relationships, emotions, and personal values. Human experience of sexuality are diverse, and understanding and respecting that diversity helps create a more inclusive and supportive community. You do not have to understand what it's like to be gay, to be trans, to be black, to be Jewish, to be disabled. You can't understand. It's about acceptance. Accept us on our common humanity. So when I put on the first Pride in Harrogate, we called it Pride in Diversity, because all those on the protected scale all have the same feelings of hopelessness, being not worthy, put down. And so we become smaller people and not our true selves. And healthy sexuality is grounded in respect. Respect for ourselves, respect for others, and respect for personal boundaries and consent. The more we approach this topic with openness, curiosity, and compassion, the better equipped we'll be to build a healthy relationship and stronger communities. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Lee. And thank you, Karl, as well. Thank you, both of you, for opening up for your personal experiences and your views on the topic. Hearing your stories and insights highlights exactly why these conversations matter so much to our church communities, especially as the wider connection prepares to gather here over the coming week. Before we open up to questions, I just thought I would read from Psalm 139, verses 13 to 15, which forms a lot of our discussion around this. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book. That's just an excerpt from Psalm 139, which appreciates each and every individual based on God's creation. And this is what our topic is centered on now, the differences, the diversity, as was mentioned by Lee, within all of us. I will open up the floor to all those who would like to ask any questions. Let us be sensitive in how we request answers from Karl and Lee, respecting that they have come to bear their experiences and share with us this evening. I would also like to highlight that behind me, for those who can see, and hopefully they will wave, is part of the exec, who I can tell some are trying to hide behind my shoulders, but we want to welcome them as well today, and we're hoping we'll get a few questions coming from behind me as well.
No
but
pressure.
The floor is open. No pressure, Executive. I think while we're waiting for any hands to come up, I've got one question, and this is directed to Karl, but not limited to your response only, Karl, and this is maybe something we can bring out for discussion. You've spoken about how the gender-bred man model can be a wonderful tool for learning. For those who are trying to understand the beautiful, diverse ways God creates us, how does that model help us to look at one another through a lens of grace rather than confusion?
Well, I think the first thing to say would be that it's a reminder that none of us, actually, when you stop and think about it, are whatever stereotype of male or female we kind of carry around in our heads. I mean, thinking just about gender expression, say, if you were to list stereotypical characteristics of a man or a woman, and then you were to ask somebody, well, what about such and such an individual you know? Mm-hmm. The chances are that person will have some of the characteristics you put in the box that matches their gender, but also others from the opposite, in inverted commas, gender. Mm-hmm. So it's just a little reminder in the way that it sets out the scales of manness, womanness, etc., in the different words it uses, that we're all diverse, that none of us is, you know, a clone of some stereotype. We are all unique individuals made in the image of God. And sometimes the conversation focuses on those of us who don't happen to be cisgender or heterosexual. But actually, this diversity is part of all human experience, and it's part of the way God has made each and every one of us. And I think that's to be celebrated.
Yes.
When we start from a place of celebration of the richness of God's creation, that is much, you know, a much healthier place in terms of then overcoming some of the confusion and questions and doubts that there might be. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes. Thank you, Karl. Any questions from the people in the room or on Zoom?
Yeah.
We've got a question that is within the chat, and that is coming from Delphine. I'll read it out. Did you have any difficulty getting treatment to change to male, and did you get support from family and friends?
So, well, it's probably easy to start with my family. Initially, when I came out as trans, I'd previously come out as maybe bisexual, maybe pansexual, not quite sure, but certainly not straight, when I met my now wife. So that was before I transitioned. And my parents had been okay with that, just about anyway. When I told them I'm trans, my mum's initial reaction was, oh, that makes so much sense. And then I said I'm going to transition, and then she hit the roof. And I didn't actually speak to my parents for about 6 months because they were not supportive initially. However, they did go and talk to other people. Some of the things my mum came out with, I'm sure she went to see a counsellor because it wasn't my mum's language, but she'd obviously talked it through. And just before I lost her at the beginning of 2015, it was not long after I'd had my top surgery. Mum and Dad came to visit me, and my mum very gently hugged me because she didn't want to hurt my chest. And then she said, you now look like you always should have done. And so, you know, my mum went on a heck of a journey to get from where she started to where she ended up. And I think that's often the case for quite a few people who transition, that it takes time for friends and family to adjust. Yeah. I did lose a couple of friends over it. I've had some friends who've since apologised for how they were initially, and we get on perfectly well again. But not everybody. But I would say the vast majority were supportive. And in terms of getting treatment, it was not easy because when I went through, it took just over a year from first seeing my GP and saying, I think this is me, I'd like you to refer me to a gender clinic, to actually get my first appointment at said gender clinic. whereas now the waiting lists are in some places 5, 10 plus years. So basically, in some parts of the country, gender affirming care is effectively not available on the NHS because the waiting times are so long. So while I had a very straightforward journey, really, I mean, I could tell some stories about how psychiatrists ask really intrusive personal questions and how medicalised the whole thing is and how it's still treated as a mental health issue by the NHS and so on and so forth. But so on the whole, my experience was okay. For people coming after me, it's miserable. It really is. So it's one thing that really needs to change, in my view.
Yes, yes.
Well, thank you for the question, Delphine.
Yeah, thank you. That's lovely. What a good, honest answer. Thank you. It's a nice answer. Bless you.
Thank you. Thank you, Delphine. Do we have any other questions? Oh. We've got a question from the exec.
It's a question for Karl. I just wondered if you were involved with the church through all your transition.
Yep. So I transitioned in 2012, by which point we were living in Milton Keynes. So I was working for a bank based down there. I became a local preacher in the midst of transitioning, and had a very, very supportive minister called Brenda Mosedale, who was fab, and who looked after me and asked all the hard questions that needed asking. So she was, in many ways, the perfect person to accompany me through that. And I'm told I was, because transition is quite a long process, the first person to go through candidating while also transitioning. As I know trans people who've come out at college or later on in circuit life, but I think, as I understand, I was the first to be going through all that process at the same time. And I have to say, on the whole, actually, it was a really good process from my point of view, almost like people were falling over themselves to be affirming. I have found in circuit life, again, there's a small minority who have been hostile. Some of those have left. One person left before I even arrived. Somebody else, her husband told her she was leaving, which I think says everything about their relationship and nothing much about me. But there are people who weren't great at first who since, apologised. And there was one particular chap, his whole view of me seemed to change when I took his sister's funeral. And I think at that point he started to see a human being. And so that's been my experience most of the time in the life of the church, that, that once people get to know you and realise that there's more to you than your gender identity, that being trans is a small part of who you are, and they come to see a real human being, then it goes a long way to breaking down barriers. And so my experience of this first appointment, which is coming to an end, I'm on the move in a few weeks' time, has on the whole been very good. And I found the church generally to be supportive.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Thank you, Karl. Any other questions? I'm going to turn to you, Lee. Karl has given us a beautiful foundation regarding identity. As we look at sexuality and the ways we love and connect with one another, how can our churches better embody that radical, welcoming love that Christ models for us?
Sorry, I'm wowing again. Going back to that decision in 2021, when the church affirmed same-sex marriage, etc., my heart sang, and I thought, at last, from the beginning, and that's the time I sat down. But for me, it missed a trick, so to speak, in that it allowed churches to opt out. Mm-hmm. A church could say yes or no to allowing or registering for same-sex marriage. And so for the LGBT community, we don't know which church is actually accepting. And I know colleagues, I think Pam may have said something, that not every Methodist church is accepting. And if you'll go to that church, you know, it's not a very good experience. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's a bit hit and miss, and I would like to see the church show its inclusiveness, not just say it, but actually show it. Mm-hmm. Now, I've been on the websites and looking at, when I was talking to Pam, Pam is the Solidarity Circle leader for LGBT in the Methodist Church. And she's been trying to get churches to show their acceptance. Have a little flag, just a little rainbow flag outside your church, says to us in the community, we're accepted there. Because if you go in and you think you're safe, because the Methodist Church now accepts, and you get some homophobic comments, etc., that then undermines who you are, and they don't feel safe in church. So I think the church has still, for me, got a little way to go. Is to accept people that they are God's children. My mother, as I've told lots of you, couldn't read and write when she left school in 1944, but she taught me God created me with love equal to everybody else. And so I was never ashamed of who I was, but the church and people within the church shamed me. I'm an abomination, etc., and all of these, and you've had these, is just to accept who we are, but to be visible. It's not just saying you are, but to be visibly welcoming. So yes, a little flag outside on your church, up on the website. I have a friend of mine who's moved, and she said she is Anglican, but they don't accept as much, so she's looking at going to the Methodist Church. She said, is this church accepting of LGBT? I said, I'll just check. And I had to find out whether they were, if they were allowing same-sex marriage. But it's not always a giveaway, but no. It certainly is one. So that I could say, yes, go to that church, you're accepting. So unless your church puts this up, because people, if they're moving or going around or want to start going to church, they will look it up and Google it. They will go online and say, oh, that one says, oh, look. I did a blessing before they were allowed in the Methodist Church of a lesbian couple in Pooling Wharfdale, and they baptised their children. Did I get it in the neck from the district chair and my superintendent? But the love in that place was amazing. She said, I knew we were okay because my email address is Rainbow Rev. So she knew that they were okay at Pooling Wharfdale. So it's being visibly accepting. That's all.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you. Do we have any questions on the chat? Any questions amongst us? I'd like to direct a question. Oh, is that somebody speaking? Oh, I thought I heard someone asking. I'd like to direct a question to both of you, Leela and Karl. In your journeys as presbyters, where have you witnessed the church reflecting that deep pastoral care of Psalm 139, of making people feel truly known and valued exactly as they are? Do we have any success stories of where we've got it right as the church?
Do you want to go, Karl?
Okay. Well, at the risk of repeating myself, I think my experience with how Brenda supported me through my transition when she was my minister in MK was a fabulous example of how to get it right. I mean, she dealt with the people in the church who initially couldn't get their heads around it and answered difficult questions so I didn't have to. She was there when I was having real difficulties with my family and She supported my partner as well, because it wasn't easy for Sally. She'd come from a Baptist background, where she'd been told that being gay was sinful. And so she came out as gay when we got together sort of publicly, and then had to deal with, well, what does it mean for me now to be with a trans guy? So Brenda looked after and supported her as well. And was just a real example of how, you take somebody just as they are and accept them and love them. And one of the high points of my journey in those few years was that I had a kind of naming ceremony, because I became a Christian in my early 20s, and obviously that was using my old name when I was confirmed, which for me was the point of saying very publicly, here I am, God, I belong to you now. And so having that ceremony where I was able to then use Karl and to have that journey acknowledged as being of God, and this is about who God had always made me to be, was a real blessing. And I gather that when we revise the Methodist worship book, that some kind of naming service will be part of it. So that's been one really hugely powerful example for me of God's grace in practice, and I try to model that myself in my own ministry.
Thank you, Karl.
Oops, am I unmuted now? Yeah.
Don't unmute.
I seem to like to be wowing. I train with Brenda, Karl, and together she struggled to begin with, and we used to have long conversations into the middle of the night about sexuality, etc. So it's lovely to see the fact that she's gone on, and I mean I've kept in contact, how supportive she is of people, of gender and sexuality. I've had less of a positive experience, I have to say, and I don't know if you found, Karl, if it's different between trans people and LGBT. And there's a different, a different journey, and people have responded differently. As far as the church official is concerned, I've struggled over the years, but people whom I've ministered with have been more accepting, because you're there as a reflection to say that, as you're God's representative there, that God loves you. But personally, it's not been a good experience, but it's better than it was in the Anglican Church. There are still struggles. I've been going around the connections, talking, and in the Chester area, there were 4 people who came to the talk, and one was trans, one was LGBT, one was non-binary. So we had quite a little wonderful core, and the trans woman was still having problems within her church. So I said it's sporadic, and this is what I think we need to iron out within the Methodist Church, is how can we be consistent with our support of those who are all marginalised. For me, it's not just about gender, sexuality, it's whatever, where we are seen as different.
Yeah, and I think, kind of picking up on that, I think because I happen to be married to a woman and present in a fairly boring middle-aged bloke kind of a way, I'm not threatening, I suppose, to some people. And I had an experience recently at a Churches Together meeting where I was asked about my successor, who's starting in September. And one of the other people there said, have they got a family? And I said, well, they have a wife. And the silence in the room was, you could have cut the tension with a knife. And it was so disappointing, given the group have accepted me as an openly trans person, completely okay. So, yeah, sometimes I think there's still more hostility in the church to gay people, whereas I think there's maybe more hostility in wider society towards trans people.
Yeah.
Just because so much of the media seems to have it in for us, and politicians have gone with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it is different. And so I if I was with a man, if I'd happened to fall in love with a bloke, I think I would have been given a far harder time where I am. which is sad, but I think it's the reality that,
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, I got, oh, sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Lee.
I got people saying to me, we need people like you, Lee, to help tell us about it. And I said, Mabel, do you love Fred, her husband? She said, yes. I said, that's all you need to know. Is, you know, there's nothing to understand. Love is love, whom is God.
Yes.
And so don't overcomplicate it. We do, is just see people as human beings, children of God.
Absolutely.
Loved. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think for the benefit of everyone on the group, we've just received a message from Paul. Thank you very much, Paul. And Paul is saying the Dignity and Worth website of the Methodist Church has a map of which Methodist churches are registered for same-sex marriage.
Yes, but it's out of date, Paul.
Yeah.
I've been on it before I came to this.
Yes.
I looked at it and it's out of date because it hasn't got, well, my church is in my circuit, nor has it got, I don't know whether it's got Thirsk in it or not.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean, it needs to be up to date, Paul.
Yeah.
It's great that Dignity of Worth have got it, but it needs updating continually. And I'm saddened that in my own circuit, there are only 2 churches out of 14. Now,
But I think the responsibility is on the presbyter or the church council secretary who has done the paperwork to make sure it is there. So we need to be highlighting further back down the line to church councils, local trustees, that they need to be doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Oh, Ruth has a question.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We've got the mic, Ruth.
You have to move.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have a comment more than a question, I think, hopefully. Some of us, I am a cis woman, I've been straight all my life, but I spent nearly 4.5 years getting our church signed up as a same-sex marriage, even though we voted 5 years ago now. It's taken the presbyter of the circuit, and we are a one-minister circuit, 4.5 years to do the work, and he wouldn't let anybody else do it. He needed to do it, and I've tried every which way to do that. So there are some of us out there fighting, I don't know if the words that's right, fighting the cause, but we are trying really hard, and I will personally make sure it's on the website if I have to. But it's not always an easy fight as well for some of us that are really allied.
It shouldn't.
If that's if that's not the right term.
Ruth, it shouldn't still be a fight because the vote was in 2021. I was at home crying, but we shouldn't still be doing that. And people, in my circuit, oh well, we haven't got any, i.e. LGBT people. How do you know? I was always told you don't look like one. So again, it's these stereotypes. But it's, oh, well, you know, nobody's making a fuss. It's not making a fuss. But there's so many things going on in the world. I sometimes feel, oh, you know, no. Which corner do you fight? But anyway, I think we need to.
Yes. I think it's a subject that when you're sharing your lived experiences, any lived experiences within the church spaces, it takes a lot of heart because it doesn't come with the perception that we think it'll be received. We think we're going into a soft place into the church, which is not always a soft place. And I'm going to ask the last question, unless someone has a question that they'd really like to ask. From your own perspective, what do you wish more congregants understood about the quiet joys and the unique challenges faced by LGBTQ plus Christians today?
It's literally the joy. I went up to Edinburgh last year and went to Edinburgh Pride, and I'm stood there with my rainbow dog collar, and all these people going past, many wouldn't have been Christian, were heart signs, pictures taken, and, you know, thanks. is for the church to be seen as welcoming and loving. For the congregants. Oh, sorry, no, go on.
Sorry, Lee. I thought you'd finished. I didn't mean to cut you off. I think for me, it would be recognising that trans people are not walking issues. The way we're talked about in the mainstream press is often very dehumanising. You know, the BBC's language of trans-identified, this, that, or the other that they like to use, or biological, this, that, or the other, as if these things are clear-cut and simple, you know, doesn't really acknowledge our humanity. So I'd like people in congregations to have the courage to look beyond the headlines and take the risk of getting to know LGBT plus people as real human beings, because actually we have an awful lot more in common than different aspects of our life experience. We're all beloved of God. We're all in a difficult world doing our best, you know, to try and live out our faith with integrity. And, you know, just because I've taken a different pathway to another person doesn't mean that my experience is wrong or theirs is wrong. It just means we're unique parts of God's creation. So, yeah, for a bit more humanity and understanding, a bit more empathy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. We've reached the end of our time for questions. And I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who contributed to the chat tonight with such thoughtfulness, encouraging people as they continue to unpack this topic within congregations, within groupings, different groupings, to be able to openly talk about it and understand better and make better decisions that are aligned with kingdom principles. Above all, a huge thank you to Karl and Lee. Thank you for your time, your immense grace, and your commitment to helping us live our mission to empower women, seek justice, and make Christ known in all our beautiful diversity. Thank you very much, Karl. Thank you, Lee. Thank you. So to all who are traveling to Telford in this heat, the next few days is going to be extremely hot. Hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. The official opening of the conference is on Saturday, so do keep an eye out for the MWiB team and come and say hello. We've got lots at our stall this week, this month, this year. So please come through and see us. I understand Leonora has also got one of her books with her, so please come through and have a conversation with her. Would love to see you, would like to speak to you. Our next webinar, which is our final one in this series, which we hope has encouraged people to continue to talk about these difficult topics, is on Thursday, the 23rd of July, and we will be speaking on faith and politics. What would Jesus tweet? So have a wonderful rest of your evening. Stay safe and remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Good night, everyone.